To people who called it not ending well, fair enough. But to see it go that bad, that quick, fucking hell.
I feel like
that
Everton...
Club, they're feeling like a toxic club now.
They nosedived it.
Yeah, but they're becoming like England. Like it's just not worth it.
So we all know Everton are completely in the mud, and I totally agree with what True Geordie just said there. If you remember England around 2008 to about 2012, maybe even a bit later up to about 2016, it seemed like any manager that went in there was bound to fail. It's like when you're in school and you look around and you see 5 kids with ADHD, 1 kid with learning disabilities, and another kid who has anger issues, and you're just looking at the teacher like, you've got no chance here, son. That's the kind of vibe I got from that England team, and it's a feeling I'm getting with Everton right now. But before I go any further, for cheap, good quality football jerseys, retro jerseys and tracksuits, go over to www.jerseyfever.com. I myself have bought a number of different jerseys from Jersey Fever, including this 2003-2004 Manchester United shirt with Ronaldo on the back, and this one's probably my favourite. So if you want a shirt like this, be sure to click the link in the description below and use code ATLANTISFOOTBALL with a space to get 5% off.
The way that Moshiri was running the club, I mean, it's terrible.
500 million spent.
No,
insane.
Yeah, look, that's ridiculous. In 5 years, they've spent £500 million, and they've got Rondon and Iwobi still playing for the team. Like, how's that possible?
Yeah, but that's because when you take over Everton and you've got money, and look, he might have the right intentions, but the facts are, as soon as people see you with a big pot of cash, that you're getting taken for a mug, mate.
So I totally agree with what both Rory and Adam have said here. Moshiri's gone into this with the mindset of, if you have enough money, you'll get the success. If you look at some of their signings and the money they've spent, it's absolutely ridiculous. So when they brought in Richarlison, even though he has turned out to be a decent player, and because of the inflation in the market, the £35 million doesn't seem as bad. But at the time, I remember thinking he's massively overvalued. They could have got a lot better value for the money they spent. They spent £35 million on Iwobi, which is even now ridiculous. They spent like £25 to £30 million on players like Michael Keane, Yerry Mina, Cenk Tosun. They were basically just pissing money down the drain. They spent £45 million on Gylfi Sigurdsson, who at the time was an ageing player coming into his late 20s, and he had a good few seasons at Swansea, but he was nothing like special. If you're paying £45 million for a player, you want them to at least develop into a top-level Champions League player. He never had that potential, and he's reached his full potential now. He's a nonce, he's in prison. Bad signing because of that. I mean, even if he scores 15 goals a season, what's the point in that if you're just going to go with a 15-year-old and end up in prison the next year? Not Everton's fault for that transfer maybe, but still shouldn't have paid £45 million for him, so you did have it coming. But it wasn't necessarily that the players they were bringing in were bad per se, but they were paying Champions League level fees for players who were at best 7th, 8th level. And so after this massive expenditure of over £500 million, I think it is, I think the net spend is something like 250 million. I think they're in the top 4 for net spend, which is absolutely crazy considering where they are over the past 5 years. But because they overpaid for these players who probably were about mid-table level, they've ended up with an inflated squad. They now can't use the rest of their budget to bring in better players, and these players are on massive wages as well. So the squad is completely bloated, full of aging mid-table level players, and I always think it's better to maybe have players who aren't as good as other squads, but they're younger and they can develop quicker and they're hungrier. It just seems to work out better. If you think about that Southampton side a couple years back, when they brought in those players, they weren't established names. Everton were looking for established names, whereas what they should have been looking for are players who could develop into established names. And that's really where they've gone wrong. They spent money as though they're a top 4 club, but obviously if you're a top 4 player, you're not going to go to Everton. You're going to go to one of the top 4 clubs who can offer you Champions League. So they've gone in with the mentality of a top 4 club ready to spend big money, but the only players that are available for them are basically mid-table level players. And that's why they've ended up massively overspending.
Which I thought, you can't give Rafael Benitez, Damari Gray and Andros Townsend and expect it like
he
that.
gave himself them. He had full control over what
I'm
he
sure
did.
you
say that, but I
they
don't know
wouldn't
if
have
that's
been
true,
first
but
on his
yeah.
wish list, though, would they?
But
nobody walks into a club and they go, "Okay, Rafa, we're going to give you. Who do you need?" He hasn't.
But you know
gone,
what's messed
Damari
up, though?
Gray.
When you
Damari
get,
Gray.
I think it starts from him not being wanted, though.
What?
It's
Yeah,
from him
Clark.
not being wanted, because as soon as you're not wanted, because they started off quite well, didn't they? And as soon as one result goes wrong, and then you've got fans that never quite sure about him anyway start getting on his case, it's easy then for players to go, wow, the fans don't want you.
The fans
You're
are
a bit of a
him.
prick.
The fans are blaming him
I hear Dan
regardless.
Murphy and Jamie Carragher talk about him as if he was proper, like, strict and on it and that. So then you can see players thinking, bro, we can get this guy sacked any minute now.
So here, I actually disagree with what Rory was saying, and I agree with what Adam was saying. And when I play the clip later on of James Lawrence Allcott, you'll see exactly what I mean. I think Rafa Benitez has to take massive amounts of blame for the situation at Everton. Yes, for the last 4 seasons, the blame can't be with Benitez, he obviously wasn't there, it has to be Moshiri. But if you're looking at this season, Benitez has massively declined Everton. Everton under Ancelotti, yes, they weren't pushing for top 4 or top 6 when they maybe should have, considering how much they've spent, but they weren't fighting relegation. The problem with Benitez is he's got this, he's basically like a Spanish Sam Allardyce, if we're honest. I think he's living off his previous reputation. He did very well at Liverpool, obviously won the Champions League, got them top 4 quite a few times, but hasn't really succeeded massively anywhere else. If you look at his time at Napoli, he wasn't competing for Serie A titles. Maurizio Sarri came in and drastically improved that Napoli side. And if you think back, Benitez had a pretty good side at Napoli. He didn't compete for the Serie A title, went to Real Madrid and really rubbed players up the wrong way. Went out of there pretty quickly. I think people let him off that because it was Real Madrid. He succeeded at Newcastle simply by keeping them up. Now, whilst it's a good achievement to keep a side in the Premier League, it doesn't mean you're a great manager. Like Sam Allardyce and Tony Pulis have made that their marker. But if you put them at a top level club, they fail. Like if you look at Sam Allardyce at Everton, he failed. Tony Pulis when he was at Crystal Palace, even though he did have some success at West Brom. I can't remember the other clubs he was at, but he seemed to hit a ceiling once he got a side to mid-table, and Rafa Benitez definitely has that ceiling. But because he never reached the ceiling with Newcastle because of the expenditure, he was never able to really even get them into mid-table, his reputation survived on and on. And really, I think he's only good for keeping a side in the Premier League. So when Everton gave him the job, I did sort of think this is a very negative move, it's very conservative, and just by his approach you can see the damage he's done.
God, I'd be worried if I was an Everton fan, because you look at the other teams in the league, they've got something to sort of create a bit of hope. Maybe Duncan Ferguson can provide that. The next week or so is absolutely huge for this football club, but the creativity has gone. And that's down to Rafa Benitez. Rafa Benitez has done some incredible damage to this football club, both in terms of the feeling around it with the fans. But look at the creativity. If you think of Luca Dean, who of course played for Aston Villa in that game, and James Rodriguez, of the 3 players who provided the most creativity last season, Richarlison 51 live passes, open play passes that created shot creating actions. Luca Dean 49. James Rodriguez, 44. So you're losing 2 of the 3 players that provide the most creativity. And you add into it Damari Gray, solid, good. Andros Townsend, similar kind of thing. But they've gone backwards.
So I think James hit the nail right on the head there. Rafa Benitez completely drained Everton of any creativity. If you look at the players he got rid of, James Rodriguez, they were Everton's 2 most creative players. And if you aren't going to have them in your starting 11, with James Rodriguez, that was the case from the start of the season, Digne, that happened later on, you've got to replace them. And he replaced them with Andros Townsend, who is a washed-up mid-table player at best. Damari Gray I do actually rate, but he's still not the level that Everton require if they want to be competing for like the top 7. He's a decent player, and I think he will develop into a top 7 player, but at the moment Everton needed a lot more. And Rafa Benitez, like Jose Mourinho, and some of the English managers as well, like Sam Allardyce, they're stuck in a previous generation. Benitez wants to sit behind the ball in a 4-5-1 or a 4-4-2 and look to counter quickly. It's all right in certain games, it does look good when you beat a top side, but when you're trying to break down a Burnley or a Southampton, or when you're playing these sides who you're expected to win against, I just don't think Rafa Benitez's style is suited to that at all. And that's why he thrived at Newcastle, because Newcastle pretty much went into every game being on the back foot, and so his style really suited them. However, with Everton, they're trying to be a progressive side, and so Benitez's lack of a coordinated possession system to get the best out of their creative players really hampered them. And so Everton regressed from a side who were maybe looking to push into the top 8, the top 7, to a side that's now really in the mix for a relegation, and if they do stay up, it will probably be a good achievement for whichever manager comes in. But just to conclude, I do think Rafa Benitez has to take massive responsibility for this particular season. I think a lot of managers who would have come into this situation at Everton would have done a lot better. They would have kept them around the 10th position. But I think Rafa Benitez was a petrol on the fire that was already brewing at Everton, and it's just gone to disaster. But over the past 5 seasons, without doubt, it is the board's fault. They've spent money like a fucking 18-year-old in a fucking Louis Vuitton store. They've just gone out and bought fancy items that look good on paper, not really thinking about the chemistry of the squad. And this is what happens. This is why when people criticise Pep Guardiola for the amount of money he spent, it's important to remember this Everton case. It's just because you have a shitload of money doesn't mean you're going to have a shitload of success. And in the end, like Everton, you can just turn into shit. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe, click the bell for notifications. Also check out the phone cases, which will be linked in the description below.